Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Alain. As you can see, I'm here with a special guest today, and I'm actually drinking out of Made for Mayhem mug that I have because Phil has a company that has to do with mayhem, and he writes about mayhem and self-defense. And before I have him introduce himself, we're going to be talking a lot about people who carry tactical pens can't fight and other dumb things people say about self-defense. So that's this morning's topic. And before I have Phil introduce himself briefly, I just want to remind everybody, go to enjoylifesafely.com, download those free resources, get that newsletter, a lot of great information to help you stay safe, enjoy life, and be exceptional. Now, we're going to talk about some dumb things people say self-defense, and there's a lot of them. And Phil has collected a bunch in this book. And before we talk about the book, Phil, why don't you just introduce yourself to some folks that maybe don't know you? Although if you're in the self-defense industry or world or anywhere around that in social media, they've probably heard about you before.
Well, I have been inflicting myself on the self-defense world for many years now. I've been a content creator. I've worked with multiple internet marketers. I've written for magazines. I had my own website, The Martialist, for many years, and I've written a number of books, including some silly ones, like Street Sword, which has been made fun of by some of the internet's greatest making fun of programs, like At Midnight and The Worst Things for Sale and stuff like that. I owe Paladin Press a debt that I can never repay because if they hadn't hung that silly title on that book, it would have come and gone and been forgotten. And instead, it has enjoyed a kind of enduring infamy, which, as an author, it's hard to dislike because if people are talking about you, they find your other stuff. So I'm something of an article troll. You slip the work order under the door and, come back to the hollow stump the next day to get the stacks of printouts. And I spend most of my time here in this office writing things. And the book, People Who Carry Tactical Pens Can't Fight, and Other Dumb Things People Say About Self-Defense, because I couldn't figure out a way to make the title longer. That book was born of my frustration with just the dumb myths and mythology that pervades the self-defense industry that you see over and over again, and which has been with us for as long as I've been aware of the topic, and much longer than that. The internet ushered in a new age for debunking self-defense myths, because before that, somebody sitting at a bar could tell you that stupid story where his buddy tried to use karate and got hit with a chair. That's an urban legend that multiple people have told as if that story happened to them. I've even experienced someone telling me that story as if it happened to them when it did not. And there was a time when you could just pretend to be a ninja master and no one would question it. So the internet made that a lot harder for a lot of people. And fortunately, it's a lot easier to debunk stupid self-defense myths, but they're still with us. They still happen. And more than ever, it's important, I think, to call them out as stupid, because otherwise they'll never stop, and they never will stop. I mean, these myths will always be with us. As long as there are people who would rather just repeat something they heard that sounds good rather than actually investigate the topic, these pieces of mythology will be part of the self-defense landscape. But if we can counter them with just one person, we've done something good.
And I agree. And why don't we start with this myth that people who carry tactical pens can't fight? The first one in the book, and the cover of the book. Why did you choose that one? I mean, what's your thoughts on that saying?
It kind of inspired the whole book. There is a self-defense guy who I absolutely cannot stand, who is quite successful, and his videos are quite viral. He's clearly working with someone who understands marketing and thumbnails, or he himself does. And every time someone shares one of his videos, a little part of me dies inside, because he's only ever right about self-defense accidentally, in that way that a broken clock is right every couple times a day. So one of his many clickbait videos was about how people who carry tactical pens can't fight. And I got to thinking about that, because it's so typical of the way a certain type of person approaches self-defense and dismisses weapons generally. The same people will tell you how useless Kubitons are, and how, if you're holding a Kubiton, you can't grapple because you can't open your hand, and nonsense like that. And what they all have in common is they have to ignore simple physics, because the reason a tactical pen or a Kubiton keychain works is just physics. You're just concentrating force into a smaller area. Now, yeah, it's true.
And we're
If
having
I just have that.
Yep, we're having a little bit of
Oh no,
internet problems. You're freezing up a little bit, Phil, and I just want to tell everybody that we're going to work our way through that, because if Phil freezes or disappears, he's going to be right back. So we're going to deal with that. So let people know.
There are a lot of people hoping, let him freeze. But there are a lot of who treat these things as talismans. So if I just have the tap pen.
And for some of those that don't understand what a tactical pen is, it's a fancier pen. And here's a Kubiton, what Phil mentioned. All they are force multipliers to help with your thing. This isn't a tactical pen, but it's a metal pen that works just the same. And putting any of these in your hand can enhance your striking. And so to say that you can't fight because you have one of these is pretty ridiculous. All it is a tool to help you with whatever other skills you might have.
I think the attitude that some people have, where they want to dismiss weapons as, you must be insecure in your fighting abilities, you must be weak, you must be this, you must be that. It's because they're viewing self-defense as a contest to be won rather than a condition to be overcome. There is no I'm the winner in self-defense. Success is did you go home not injured and not infected with some new bloodborne pathogen because blood splashed on you? Are you intact? Are you safe? And if you can do that by using a weapon or by avoiding the situation, then you've quote unquote won. But there are people who refuse to see self-defense that way, and they see it as a measure of their toughness, and that's ego, and there's no place for that in real self-defense, because you're just going to lead yourself into trouble that way.
Jay is watching, and Jay says any tool is good. And that reminds me, this is years ago, early 90s, when Mark McYoung signed one of his books for me, one of the first times that we were together in person. And he wrote, "You're not an ape, use a tool." So it's like that's inscribed in a book back here on the shelf. And it's true. Tools are to help us defend ourselves, because it's not a contest with rules where we're trying to win a trophy. We're trying to go home, like Phil said. And before we get into anything else in the book, Phil, I think it's a good time to bring this up. One of the things I really like about things I've seen you talk about, self-defense is for everyone, not just the MMA muscular in shape athlete, but anyone. And I agree with that 100%. And that's why I'm out teaching nurses and teachers and people of all walks of life. I don't care their color, creed, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter. Self-defense is a right for everyone and shouldn't be limited by certain things. What are some more of your thoughts on that?
Well, I've always been frustrated by the idea that, for some people, step one in their self-defense program is become a semi-professional athlete. Like, that's fine, but there's a body of techniques that will obviously work if you are muscular and in shape and aggressive, but almost anything will work for you if you are muscular and in shape and aggressive. And so self-defense has to be a lot more to a lot more different types of people if it's going to be useful. Otherwise, it's only those people who are in shape and young and flexible who are capable of defending themselves. It's a lot like when someone flashes their lights on the highway to tell you that you've got a headlight out. Like, would you like me to climb out there and fix it right now? If I show up and they're like, "Oh, well, you're grossly overweight, so come back when you've lost 100 pounds." Like, but what if I need to defend myself now? You can't stop the mugger and be like, "Hang on, I've got some crunches to do. Can we put this on a calendar for when I'm in better shape?" And people will misinterpret that as saying, "Well, you're saying that you don't need to be in good." No, I'm not saying don't better shape if you can. But right now, every single one of us needs to be able to defend ourselves. And I don't believe turning people away and saying, well, you just can't. I don't believe that's an option. And yeah, an elderly woman is at a great disadvantage when it comes to self-defense. That doesn't mean there aren't things that she can do to protect herself. There was a news story just recently in Rochester, New York, in a Wegmans parking lot. And if you know anything about upstate New York, Wegmans is a big deal up here. It's like the grocery store. Alec Baldwin's mom says she doesn't want to move away from the area because she doesn't want to be without Wegmans. And a 75-year-old man was surrounded by like 6 thugs in the parking lot. So he looked at them and channeled his inner Gerard Butler and kicked one of them in the nuts so hard that everyone else ran away. And that's a 75-year-old man. So, there's always going to be things you can do. There's always going to be tools you can use. And yes, it might mean that you have to rely on a force multiplier the older you get. One of the things that I'm coming to grips with as I embrace my inner old man is the older you get, the more everything starts to hurt. And there are times when you just, when you're 20 years old and made of rubber, there's literally nothing you can't do. But as you get older, you lose the ability to do that. And that's true even if you're in great shape. Now, if you're in great shape, you obviously you're better off. You have an advantage over somebody who's not. But that decline eventually gets us all. And if you want to be able to defend yourself into old age, so you're not just some helpless person whining about the past and what could have been, then you need to expand your self-defense repertoire into techniques that will actually help you when you're not able to, you're not going to tell your 75-year-old grandmother, so did you shoot in for a takedown? It just doesn't work that way.
Exactly. Dixon's here, and Dixon says, yay for force multipliers. Dixon's a longtime martial artist, many decades, and a friend of mine that we teach together in Florida every year at the Korean Martial Art Festival.
Nice.
So he knows a thing or two about self-defense too throughout the years. This one I really liked that you put in here. Wasp spray works because, for the last number of years, I've been teamed up with Reflex Protect, and I teach Reflex Protect classes to hospitals, schools, municipalities, businesses, where we go in and we teach them what it is, when and when not to use it. So people are using it on legal situations where they can defend themselves, and how to use it, where we take an inert out and actually practice. And that's what helps them get their certification, which makes the insurance companies and risk managers and everybody in the organization happy to be able to issue that for them to carry while they're working, in a hospital or a school or a business. And all the time I get people after the class, well, I just have wasp spray at home. And I tell them, I said, well, you should do a Google search. You'll find a lot of articles saying why that's not a good tool. And this is much better for this reason, that reason. But some people are, well, no, I have wasp spray and I was told by so-and-so.
And that's the mythology angle. It gets repeated, and so people believe it. For the love of God, stop recommending household cleaning products for self-defense, because either it's not going to work at all, it's going to do almost nothing, or it's going to work too well, depending on the corrosivity of the product that you selected. You burn a guy's eye out with a can of brake cleaner, you're probably going to prison for that, even if it was otherwise legitimate self-defense. Juries tend to get a little squeamish when it comes to permanently maiming people with household cleaning products. I tend to think more often than not that products simply won't be effective. Generations of horror movies have taught us that, well, all you need to do is whip up a handy hairspray and cigarette lighter flamethrower, and you can fend off, the worst people that come at you. But I think so many people want a non-tactical answer that they're willing to believe nonsense because it makes them feel better. I don't need to get into that pepper spray stuff. I don't need to delve into the world of weapons. Those are scary and politically incorrect, and I don't want that. If I just keep this household product somewhere, then I feel safe because theoretically it's there when I need it, and I'll just hope that I never need it. These are the same people that will put like a baseball bat next to their bed. For some reason, the baseball bat speaks to us on some genetic level. A lot of people go straight to the caveman club, and I can't think of a worse improvised weapon than a baseball bat. If it's full size, especially, they're terrible weapons. They're slow, they're unwieldy, they're easily countered. But there was some rioting going on in the UK at one point, and I saw a news article about how sales of fungo bats had skyrocketed in that locale, and it wasn't because people had suddenly embraced a love of baseball or cricket. It's because they were buying them to use as clubs. And I don't know what it is about the baseball bat that is so common among people who are completely untrained and completely unprepared for self-defense, but they think, well, I have a good heavy club, so I'm all set. And no, you're not. And it's the same with, well, I put my wasp spray here, so I'm good. You are not good. The voice of the narrator says, no, he was not good.
Yeah, it baffles me why you would want to use something like that when there are products made like Reflex Protect specifically for the purpose of defending yourself, and it's legal and it's non-lethal, not going to get you in that legal trouble where, yeah, you burn someone's eyes out. When you're on the stand, they're going to be asking you, have you ever heard of pepper spray? Well, yeah, I've heard of it. Why didn't you have that instead of something that's going to permanently burn someone's eyes out? What? And again, juries do weird things, and criminals' families have sued and won many people that legitimately were defending themselves or their property, but they crossed the lines, of what you're allowed to do.
One of the biggest problems our society faces when it comes to self-defense is no one understands the legality of self-defense. They don't know when you can use force. They don't know at what point to stop. And so they feel like, well, I was morally justified in fighting this person off, so therefore I was morally justified in delivering a finishing technique. There was that pharmacist who shot an armed robber and then got another gun and shot him again while he was lying on the floor. And it was at that point that he crossed the line into murder, and he went to prison for it because he just didn't know. No one had ever bothered to teach him the legality of self-defense. And I think society-wide, we're doing everyone a disservice by not considering those issues, because you absolutely will have to answer for your actions. Even if say you defend yourself, you never tell anyone, and you run away and you try to keep it a secret. There are cameras everywhere. There are people with cell phones everywhere. Somebody saw you, and you have to assume that they did.
Dixon says, if forced to use a club-like tool, give me a fireplace poker over a baseball bat any day. That would be easier to wield.
He's prepared for every horror movie.
Yeah. And that brings me up to the thing too, and I see this a lot with tourniquets when I'm teaching. People say, well, I'll just use a belt. Well, mini belts are not good tourniquets. My gun belt that, I don't wear a gun on it all the time, but I wear that belt probably the most often. It would be a terrible tourniquet because it's really thick leather, and it would be tough to get it tight enough. And when I see people saying, well, I would just use a belt, or I'm just going to use wasp spray or this or that, and they plan to use it, not just I would use it if I have nothing else. They're planning to use their belt. They're planning to use wasp spray. Why plan to improvise when there are tools made specifically for the job?
Well, the worst part of that is there are tools made specifically for the job that are bad. There are tourniquets on the market that don't turn. Like I read an article not that long ago about Chinese-made tourniquet products that look like more popular products and simply don't work well when you attempt to use them. So,
yeah, in every one of my classes, I hold up a cat, which a cat is the most popular, and there's Soft T and some others. And I also use a Sam tourniquet. I usually bring those, and I'll hold those up and I'll say, when you go buy these, you buy them from like North American Rescue, and you're going to be paying $30 to $40 each. If you go on Amazon and you buy a $9.99, $9.99 tourniquet, it's more than likely one of these Chinese ripoffs that tests have proved they fail. And I'd rather spend $40 and save a life than save a few and $10 for something that won't save the life that I need to save, which will more likely be my own or somebody that I care about. That's the odds are, if you save somebody, it's going to be yourself or someone you care about.
Well, and even then they have to buy two, at least one to keep in the package and one to mess around with and learn how to use.
True, and I buy the blue ones. The blue ones aren't any cheaper, they're for but they help me know these are for training. And these ones that are, the black ones that I have never been opened, never touched, that are for real. But yeah, you want to learn how to use them as well. And
Well, and
that's
it's the
with
same
any
reason Reflex Protect offers those inert training units. So most people, when they buy pepper spray, they buy a keychain unit, they never touch it, they never use it, and they've never experienced it. And you at least have to buy, if you're going to do that, you at least have to buy two identical ones. Find yourself a nice open field somewhere and just practice spraying with one of them so you know what it does, what it's like. Like, the time to discover you're really allergic to pepper spray is not the first time you use it. You
Yeah,
know.
I had a show just maybe a week ago. I was talking about the inerts, and here's one here I keep on the desk, and I said that not all pepper sprays will have an inert, and we don't have an inert yet for the little new one that we just came out with. It's a 1/2 ounce one that has a little keychain ring on it. Actually, I could show you here, right? We got this brand new one, Reflex
Oh, neat.
Protect. It has the keychain, but we don't have an inert of this size yet. And so I was telling people exactly what you just said. Buy two, go out in a safe place, practice with one. And if you actually get a little bit, it's not the end of the world. In fact, it might even be good because now you know what you're dealing with. Because I've accidentally gotten facefuls of this out training and doing different stuff before, and it sucks, but it is what it is.
Well, I had one of the old style Kimber units that doesn't look like a pistol. I forget what they called that. It looked like a little phaser, and
Mhm.
I accidentally it was attached to a bag that I was carrying, and I was traveling, and I accidentally ripped the plastic safety housing off of the unit. So I'm like, well, this is not safe to carry. So I was visiting my sister, and I went to the back of her property, which is up against some woods, and I'm like, I'll just discharge this into the woods, and then, I don't know, bury this thing. And as I'm firing it into the woods just to get the pepper spray out of it, my tongue and my nose and my eyes start to burn. And it's not even, it's just the fumes that are in the general area as I'm spraying away from myself at arm's length. And it really gives you an idea of just how powerful the stuff is and how you very much don't want it on you. So I finished doing that, and my I was like, wow, pepper spray really sucks. For the person who gets sprayed. And then I had a small shovel that I keep in my trunk, and I was burying the pepper spray unit at the edge of the woods. And my brother-in-law came home, and he's like, "Hey, what you doing?" I'm like, "It's not what it looks like."
Exactly.
Perfectly normal. Just show up and bury something in the woods.
Jeff is here and said good morning. Jeff is a longtime martial artist and student of Dr. Kim, in Hanmudo. So I hadn't known Jeff until this year. We got to meet each other at an event, and really great guy. And so thank you for being here, Jeff. Jay put 811. I'm not sure what you're talking, Jay. What's 811?
I have to admit, I don't know.
I'm not sure either, Jay. You have to explain that one to us. You had another one in here, Phil, that I was so glad that you put in here. Expect to get cut. Because I have been against that, and I have videos on YouTube, and I've been criticized for my position on it about this, teaching in a knife fight, expect to get cut. Because I have always said, no, don't expect to get cut. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You do everything you can not to get cut, and if you do, you deal with it.
I'm against fatalism when it comes to the topic of self-defense. Anything that speaks to a predetermined outcome, I just don't like, because I feel like you said, self-fulfilling prophecy. If I have this attitude that, well, I'm probably going to die, like, you're going to do dumb things because you've already programmed yourself that that's an option. The better attitude is to just do what you need to do. And yes, understand that the possibility exists that you could be cut. You might not even notice it until after the fact. I took a class with John Holshine once where he was telling us that as you're cutting the other person, you should be shouting, "Stop, you're cut, stop, you're cut," because, in the adrenaline of an actual altercation, that person might not even realize they're taking damage. And if it filters through into their brain that, oh, I'm being hurt, that they might stop and back off, because, when you are taking damage, you suddenly become worried for yourself and your priorities shift and you're no longer aggressing. Now you're assessing what's happening to you. And so, you might well end up after a self-defense issue checking yourself over and going, oh, that's not good. But I hate the fatalism that says, well, you're going to get cut, so just accept it. Like, I would choose not to accept that.
And I agree. And I've only been in 2 situations where a knife was present. I didn't get cut in either of them. One, I hit the guy before the knife was drawn. He said he was pulling a knife and I hit him. The other one, I threw the chair at the guy with the knife and ran. Not really a chair, it was a bar stool, but I was holding that. Neither of us knew what the heck we were doing. And my buddy said the MPs were coming, so I just chucked it feet for, legs first at the guy and I ran. Those are my 2 heroic knife tales.
There was a statement made by somebody, and I forget who it was, but he had a criminal record, and he was sort of setting forth some of the truisms he'd learned over the course of a misspent youth. And one of the statements he made that has stuck with me is, I never regretted running away because I never got caught for the stuff I didn't stick around to get caught for. And
100%.
Take that as you will.
But here are 3 names that also do not like the expect to get cut philosophy that so many people teach. So I think we're in pretty good company, because I remember these names because I respect all 3 of them, and they also were teaching the same thing I taught, same thing you wrote about. Bob Casper, Kelly McCann, Nick Hughes. That's pretty good company to be in with those 3. Bob unfortunately left us, but Kelly and Nick are still out there teaching. But all 3 of them have said the same thing, that expect to get cut. No, if you get cut, you deal with it, but don't expect it.
Yeah, it's one of the sad realities of time marching on. I got into self-defense back in the old Paladin Press mail order days, and a lot of the pivotal figures in that industry, the greats, many of them are getting old, and several of them have passed away. And it's a sobering thing to look around you and realize that a lot of the people that you sort of held up as your icons, your role models, and your godlike figures in the self-defense training industry, a lot of them are gone now. It's a little disturbing.
It is. It's tough, and and every year we get older, we're losing more.
Yeah.
Jay said that it was the call 811 before you dig.
Okay. That I did not make that connection, but that's funny.
I forgot about that too, but yeah, that's what you call for the fire stuff. Okay. Thanks, Jay. Another one you had in the book that I liked, I just shoot him.
Yeah,
I get that so much when I post something about my book, Survive a Shooting, or the active shooter courses. Just shoot back. I just shoot them.
It's a silly nerd reference, but many years ago, I used to read Star Wars comic books, and I had an actual subscription to them. They would show up in the mail. I don't know why that's not easier to do these days, but one of the things I remembered vividly as a child was there's a sequence where Han Solo is talking to someone who taught him how to fight with his hands. I almost think they're doing something like judo in the scene. And he tells Han Solo, I taught you that because I didn't want you to be no bigger than the size of the blaster you're holding. And something in my teen mind that clicked. And I'm like, yeah, you don't want to be no bigger than the gun you've got. If you're totally dependent on that weapon and you don't have anything else, then you're helpless. And I don't know, that just sunk into my brain early on. And there are a lot of people who are so dependent on firearms that they'll tell you, well, if I can't carry my gun, I won't go there. It's like, well, that's fine, but that's not really any way to live your life. There's lots of places you'll not only want to go, but need to go where you can't carry a gun. Ranging from, I need to go to the federal building to pick up some tax forms, to I need to travel out of state for, a child's wedding. Or there's so many things in life where you just can't always have your firearm, even if you are fortunate enough to live in the United States and not where I live, which is New York. If you live in a quote unquote free state, and especially if it's a constitutional carry state, yes, most of the time you can have a gun, and that's great, but there are going to be instances when you can't. So do you want to limit your life and only be allowed to go as a human being to those places where you can have your weapon? Or do you want to have some alternatives and understand that you might even be in a situation where you theoretically could have had your gun and didn't? People, we are not vigilant all the time. Everyone relaxes. Everyone lets down their guard. You could be one of the home defense recommendations that I've heard over and over again is when you're home, you should still be carrying your gun. Because if there was a home invasion, you'd need to first fight your way to your firearm before you can do anything else. And that's fine. And if if you regularly carry a gun, there's no reason you shouldn't carry it at home. But we can't always all be vigilant 100% of the time. I mean, I suppose you could have a shower gun in a clear container in your bathroom, and you could have one under your pillow. Like, yes, you can live the John Wick lifestyle, I suppose, but everybody lowers their guard at some point. And Murphy's Law says that's when something bad's going to happen. And because criminals choose a time and a situation that's advantageous to them, it stands to reason that when you get attacked will be when you're least prepared for it. Those are the odds. So I just don't see any reason to limit yourself to only one thing. You should be training for the possibility you won't have your gun, that you'll have to fight your way to it, that you'll be in a situation where it's nowhere to be had. Those things happen in life. And I think, yeah, you can mostly restrict your behaviors to prevent that situation from occurring, but it's no way to live.
I agree. Jay said, yeah, your gun might be locked in your car or secure gun safe or something. And why is it locked in your car? Because you had to go into the federal building and you couldn't take it with you or something like that. And why is it in your gun safe? Because, you have kids and you're a responsible parent and you don't have your loaded guns all over the house where your young children can get them. And I personally, if the last 3 years, I'm actually having withdrawals this summer because my daughter's off in Korea, has an internship over there for the summer. This is the first spring we have not gone to a big amusement park. Last year it was Disneyland, the year before was Disney World, the year before was Universal Studios, the Hogwarts stuff. Had a fantastic time taking my family to those parks. You're not allowed to carry a firearm in those parks. You go through metal detectors to get in. Been to New York City. You want to go up to the tallest building in New York City? You're going through a metal detector. You're not bringing your firearm up to the top of the building.
You're not bringing your firearm to New York City.
Well, New York City,
you live in New York State. So many people have run afoul of a permit to carry. They don't bother to look into the law. They end up in New York State and especially New York City, and they get charged with a felony because here you cannot have a pistol unless you have a New York State pistol permit. There's no reciprocity here, or very little. I don't actually know the exact details, but I know well enough to know that the second you cross a state border, you had better know what the law is there. And so many people think, well, I have a permit. Just like I don't need to have a New York driver's license to drive over the border from Pennsylvania to New York. It's not the same with pistol licenses here because this state hates gun owners. And they've made that very clear. So I hate the thought of good people who've done nothing wrong and who had no intent to commit a crime getting ensnared by that bureaucracy and treated like felons. It's horrible. And we have other problems too. We have problems with, especially in New York City, interpreting almost any pocket knife as a quote unquote gravity knife so that they can use New York's weapons statutes to prosecute the person carrying the knife. So much so that even newspapers that are not, progressive newspapers in New York City have covered the fact that people are getting penalized for stuff that wasn't actually a crime or was never meant to be a crime. So
New York does have some weird laws, because what I remember is researching the laws for Reflex Protect and pepper spray. New York it can be pocket sized, whatever that means. I mean, I could have put one of the old big giant Reflex Protect. I could put that in my pocket. But when this size actually came out, we specifically called it the pocket size because of New York as well.
Well, here in New York, they actually had to pass a law to explicitly make pepper spray legal because it hadn't been. That was a few years ago now, and there's actually been some weird changes in the law that I think were driven by case law. I was at a craft fair of all places, and I hear the telltale zzz, zzz, zzz of a stun gun discharging, and like what are those animals that stick their heads up, and not prairie dogs, but the ones that are on the Animal Planet all the time. So I'm like, what is that? So I follow the sound, and I find a lady at a booth who's selling stun guns, and she's got a little placard on the table saying, "These are legal. There was a change in the law," and it was a while back. And it almost never happens in this state that something that was illegal legal if it's a good thing. If it's a bad thing, sure, they'll make it legal all day long, but very rarely does self-defense become more legal as opposed to less. It's still kind of a gray area because while you could buy a stun gun from that lady at the craft fair, I'm not sure what happens if you get caught carrying it, or God help you if you have to use it. But that was a case where a little glimmer of hope happened. Some guy spent years fighting the law that says that nunchucks are illegal in New York State, and I believe he successfully got a win, and that made nunchucks kind of sort of legal here. I still don't know what happens if you get caught carrying them.
You actually use them, because
Yeah.
some places are legal to carry between your home and your training facility and such.
Yeah, it's a weird state, and the fact is very serious cases have involved prosecutors going after people who defended themselves with potentially lethal or lethal force. It was recorded on video. It was very clearly self-defense, and yet they were prosecuted anyway until public outcry prompted the DA to drop it. And we're having that problem more and more. It happened in that river stabbing. When I first read about that, the guy's name is Mew, the river stabbing case, where it sounded like the aggressors were a bunch of obnoxious jerks. And then when he got convicted of stabbing one of them in self-defense, I was like, oh gosh, this is a horrible loss for self-defense. Well, looking deeper into that case, Mew made several very critical mistakes, like denying his involvement at first, trying to ditch the knife, denying that he had it, changing his story several times. So it isn't as bad as it looked. It may still be the case that had he done everything perfectly, he might still have been convicted, but we don't know that, and now we'll never know. But it worries me when legitimate cases of self-defense are prosecuted as crimes and a conviction is secured. There was that fellow who shot the Black Lives. I think he was a rideshare driver. He was in the military, or he was former military, and there was a fellow pointed an AK-47 at his vehicle during one of those BLM riots. So the dude shot him, and I can't remember his name, and I don't remember the victim's name, but he was convicted of that in that shooting, and the governor of Texas just pardoned him. And we need more of that kind of thing. We need more governors understanding that a miscarriage of justice has taken place when legitimate self-defense is treated like a crime, and pardoning those people and explicitly restoring their gun rights, because only if that happens more often will we have any hope of bringing the legal system back in line with the fundamental constitutional and natural right to self-defense. That right is under assault from all corners right now. And if we don't do what we can to defend it, it's going to become harder and harder to protect yourself.
And I think that goes right in with what you said earlier. So many people do not understand the legalities of self-defense. So, I mean, you have to understand, lethal force, non-lethal force, and I need more coffee. Disparity of
parity of force, of
force, and different those concepts to understand what the legality. Because self-defense, what most people think is fighting moves. Karate is self-defense. Self-defense is a legal term that you need to understand everything about if you ever have to defend yourself and you find yourself in a courtroom. So I just, I put up there Dixon's comment about bureaucracy, and we, dealing with that. There was another chapter in here that I really liked that you had in here. And because I've been saying this for years too. And remember, a number of years ago, there were two shows on. Both of the shows had two guys that went around the world training in different martial arts. Every episode, they were in a different country. There were two different shows, and I forget which one of it was, but the two guys were over in France practicing with some Savate guys. And in that show, the announcer, the kick to the nose would shove the nose bones into the brain and be deadly. And I'm just like, you're a show about martial arts and you don't do better research than that. How could you perpetuate this fallacy on this actually really fun show to watch about these guys going around the world training?
It underscores that fiction, movies, television become reality for so many people. Most of us, rightly so, have no gauge of killing another human being. So when Bruce Willis does it in The Last Boy Scout, you're like, oh well, it was in a movie. That's how it works. And we see that imagery. It's kind of like they say visualizing a move helps create some of the same neural pathways that actually doing that move does, which is why visualization is such a powerful tool. I think that visualization works against us sometimes because we see things in movies and TV, and they repeat so often that our brains start to go, well, this is clearly how reality works because I keep seeing it. And I just saw an article on Facebook the other day about the fact that during the 60s, like 6% of movies made during a specific time period had scenes involving quicksand, thus setting up several generations to be terrified of the unrealistic threat of quicksand because movies showed them that that's how this works. And it's
I love that
exactly
post
that.
you
It's
did because I was the same when I was a kid. Back in the 70s, we played the quicksand was going to
yeah.
get us.
Yes, we were very worried about quicksand. I was very concerned about that. I also, and what you visualize can become powerful even for irrational reasons. There's a kids, like a young adult horror series, a horror novel series that I remember reading in junior high, and I found used and quite expensive the collectible novels that I remembered. There were two of them that I remembered. And one of them was about a young boy who gets possessed by a demon, and the demon's like whispering him the answers to test questions, and that's how he gets hooked. And eventually his friends have to come together and exorcise him and get the demon out of him. And I was irrationally terrified of the thought of demonic possession when I was like 10 years old. So the fact is, our brains can seize on literally anything, but if it is constantly reinforced through popular entertainment and reinforced visually, not just in text, then that can become extremely powerful, and that's how it becomes mythology, and that's how it becomes, in this case, self-defense myth. The idea that you see things in movies repeated over and over again, and you start to believe that because Lorenzo Lamas can kick a guy's gun out of his hand, that is clearly one of the techniques you use for disarming somebody with a gun.
Exactly. And, I was impressed with the nose to the brain chapter when obviously you mentioned Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans, who were the main characters, but then you mentioned Kim Coates being one of the bad guys. I was like, wow, he knows that movie. But I was so disappointed in you, Phil. That was one of Halle Berry's first movies, and you didn't mention her. Sure, she had nothing to do with that scene with the nose bones, but she was in that movie. I actually
Well,
thought it was her first movie, but I had to go double check. It was the third movie that came out that year. That was the first year any of her movies came out, but she had 3 movies that year, and that one actually was released third. So I guess we could call it her third movie, but it was one of her early roles. So.
well, and far be it from me to diminish the significance of Halle Berry's body of work, but
Dixon just said something. Let's do it. Thank you, Phil, for the realization that visualization can work negatively as well.
well, I think it was either one of Masad Ayoub's books or another work by somebody at that same level of authority who said that there are people who, even though they were wounded inconsequentially, because they were trained by television that the moment a bullet enters your body, you just lie down and die, that they expected to die and they became useless in the remainder of the altercation. And I can't remember if he said they actually died from it. I don't think so, but maybe. But because they were programmed to think, oh, I got shot, I have to lie down now because I'm doomed. And then they were shocked when they didn't die. It's the same type of programming that I've seen movie after movie where a bullet hits me, I'm just dead. And it really doesn't work that way in most cases.
No, it doesn't. And that's why when I talk to all my active shooter classes, I talk about, I'll say, hey, how many times can you get shot and not be killed? And I'll get depends on where you're shot and stuff, but then I'll get some numbers, and then I'll surprise them all with the number 27. Mike Day was shot 27 times in Iraq. 16 were in the body armor, but then the rest were anywhere else you could get shot except the brain.
Well,
And
and then
he
there are
survived
those
though.
horror stories, the law enforcement horror stories, where they're trying to put a suspect down and they pump bullet after bullet into him and he doesn't go down until they like shoot him in the pelvis so he can't actually move his legs.
Mhm.
Some people are just resilient.
They are, and I think a lot of it's up here, and that's why I spend a lot of time trying to get people to have the right mindset, which I think is more important than any physical techniques and tools that we can teach, is having that proper mindset, the willingness to do something and the unwillingness to be a victim and just lay down and die. And that brings me to one of the chapters that you have in here, where you talked about the poor advice of saying, don't fight back or you'll just make him angry. Oh, did you freeze up on us, Phil? I think Phil froze on us for a second. Let's wait for he gets back. The chapter he wrote about freezing up is just, I mean, not freezing up. He froze up. The chapter he wrote about don't fight back or you'll just make him angry is, ridiculous, because that used to be advice that they would give to people and say, yeah, don't fight back or you'll make him angry. And it just doesn't work that way, because when we fight back, it gives us the best ability to be able to, get away and to be successful. I mean, they used to tell this to ladies a lot. They would just say, for rape prevention, just lay there and endure it. Like, no, we don't want that. We want to be able to fight back and get through it. And I'm hoping Phil gets his internet back. We were doing so great, and then he had an internet problem, but I'm going to send him another invite just in case. And we'll try to get him back here, because we were going so well until we had that little problem. But the advice that don't fight back is ridiculous. It is proven that fighting back and fighting back immediately can save your life. And I think if I remember correctly, Phil mentioned Sanford Strong, which Sanford Strong wrote a book called Strong on Defense years ago. Great book, where he was insisting that people do not go to the secondary crime scene. You fight back immediately, because at the secondary crime scene, it's usually secluded, and that's where real bad things happen. So you're trying to be abducted, somebody's trying to take you, you fight back immediately. You don't just comply and go with them, because where you're going is going to be a lot worse. So that's, one of the things I know for a chapter on this book that, Phil talked about. And I'm hoping Phil can get back with us. Again, we're waiting here to see what's going on. Something happened to his internet. He froze up and disappeared on us. So if he doesn't get back, we'll close. But I want to give him a couple minutes here. So if we can get him back, so we can. Yep, he just sent me a message, said lost internet, resetting. So we will hopefully get him back here in just a second, because I do want to have a chance for us to say goodbye and things. While he's gone and getting his internet going, we'll see what else does he say up here. Oh, pee your own pants. That was another one of the things they used to tell women. If somebody's going to rape you, just pee your pants and he won't rape you. What awful advice. No, if somebody's going to rape you, you rip his eyes out, you fight back, you hurt him, you escape, and then get to safety. You don't just pee your pants. And one, there's no proof that that's actually going to stop somebody. Remember, rape is not sexual, it's power and control. And, heck, peeing your pants might just make that person more, aggressive, because he thinks, oh, I got her so scared, she's peeing her pants, and he wants that power and so forth. Yeah, bad advice. We don't pee our pants. We don't just let them do what we want. We fight back immediately. And those are some of the same things that Phil talked about in this book. Let's see, what else did he say? X% of fights go to the ground. Another one that there's no proof in that. You will hear 90% of fights go to the ground, this or that go to the ground. That was great marketing done by grappling systems. We don't really have any real statistics saying X number of fights go to the ground. If you're fighting a grappler and a grappler takes people to the ground, most of his fights go to the ground. A non-grappler, you're not going to get the same thing. Now, do fights go to the ground? Of course they do. What percentage? We don't know. In a real situation, it's advisable not to go to the ground. Going to the ground, good place to get your head stomped in by buddies.
Sorry,
and we're back. Phil, I was just talking about your chapter about not going to the ground, how that statistic is, was made up by people that wanted to market grappling systems. And so I'll let you carry on about what you said on that chapter now that you're back.
Well, I don't want to, at no point am I arguing that you shouldn't have ground grappling skills. I'm just saying that not only is it ridiculous when people make up statistics saying, because this made up percentage of fights go to the ground, you should just do that. That's no. Now, yes, you should be aware that the possibility exists. You could end up on the ground, which is the absolute worst case scenario for a self-defense situation, but also, don't use it as a deliberate strategy if you don't have to, because most of the people teaching you to do that are also ignoring the dangers that it carries with it, such that, if I tie up with one person and I'm on the ground, I may even be doing quite well. His friends might decide to start kicking me or stabbing me or whatever. There are certain assumptions that you always make in a realistic self-defense situation. I didn't make this up. This is taught by many, many self-defense instructors. One of those is that you have to assume he has friends, and you have to assume any of them could be armed, because if you don't, you'll just die in many cases. And that sounds like defeatism also, but it's really important that if you can avoid entering into a ground situation, that you do avoid that. And if you end up on the ground, there are certain techniques you can do. There's what they call the street guard, where you're on your back and you're using one drive leg to pivot, and you're kicking at him as hard as you can with your other leg in the shins to try and keep him off you. Well, that's going to go one of two ways. Either you'll make enough room that you can scramble back to your feet, or he's just going to say, to hell with it, and land on you. And now you're in that ground grappling situation anyway. But at least you're not in a situation where you're on the ground and he's doing something to you while he's still standing. So, it's not a good situation for anyone. But
No,
I don't like predetermined conclusions, and that falls into the category of predetermined conclusions that are actually very unsafe.
I agree. And, earlier we talked a little bit, or you mentioned how a baseball bat's not a great self-defense weapon, which I agree. I mean, they're heavy. I mean, if you swing a bat and you miss, there's that time, if a guy knows what he's doing, he's going to jump in. But you also mentioned in the book about that old advice that we've heard that I always thought was sort of ridiculous as well, that, well, if you're carrying the baseball bat in your car for self-defense, make sure you have your ball and glove in there too.
Yeah, because you're not fooling anybody. It's not like, oh, well, you beat that guy to death with a baseball bat, but I see it was clearly for softball purposes, so you're good. The presence of the ball and the bat might make a difference if your state has some kind of regulation about what you can carry in your car. It pro forma, it might be the case. There was at one time, like a couple of decades ago, I went to Salem, and in Laurie Cabot's witch shop in Salem, they had a sign that said, if you buy one of the double-edged knives, which are used for religious purposes in Wicca, then you must also buy something else, so that it doesn't look like you're just buying a double-edged knife, which is illegal here in Massachusetts in other circumstances. It is legal for religious purposes, but not for other circumstances. Well, like 20 years later, I went back to Laurie Cabot's witch shop, and I asked the lady behind the counter if she remembered that era, and I was curious, is that still the case? And hopefully I couched it in a way that didn't make me seem like a crazy person, because honestly, That's all I remembered about having been there before, and I was curious about it. And she's like, no, we don't still do that. So I don't know if the law changed or if they just stopped engaging in that fiction, but it was exactly the same kind of thing. Here's a weapon. If you buy it with a book on the religion, magically it's now not a weapon. And if you have a softball mitt and a ball with your bat in your trunk, well, magically I'm now safe and everything's legal. Not really, because it's the tenor of the character of your actions that's going to determine whether somebody chooses to charge you with a crime. So put those things in there if you enjoy a good game of, what do they call it? Pickup softball. Like, one guy can't really play softball with himself, but if you enjoy that kind of thing, fine. Just don't think it's this magical ticket to legality when you're just fooling yourself. It's a false sense of security.
I mean, you are either legally justified to use the amount of force you use, or you're not. Any auxiliary, accessories that you have in the car or on your person have no relevance to that at all.
Well, you may conceivably face a situation where a judge is like, so why did you have that in the car? And if the answer is, well, I also have a ball and a glove and I carry that in case I play softball with my kid or something. Okay, I can understand the rationale then when you're justifying the presence of the bat. Not that long ago, I took a picture in my shop, and hanging on the wall, somebody immediately noticed it, was the Hello Kitty youth bat that I have hanging up in my shop, because very briefly they were all the rage among self-defense types. The pink Hello Kitty aluminum bat, which is really the size of a club, it's more like a baton in an adult's hand. And so I just happened to have one because I thought it was funny. And so having a Hello Kitty baseball bat in your car, if there are no kids anywhere in your proximity and you don't have any, that's going to be harder to justify than just the fact that, I had a baseball bat and a glove. But still, it's what's going to matter is what you did. Yes, you may have to justify the circumstances after the fact so it doesn't exacerbate what you're already being charged with. And if you're just a hothead who goes out and gets in trouble and you're carrying around a baseball bat, like what was that Liv Schreiber show where he was Ray something, where he was a Hollywood fixer and he carried a baseball bat for beating people with. Like, if you're if you're engaged in that lifestyle, that's one thing. But really, if you conduct yourself like a reasonable person, then the circumstances under which you use force are what matter, and not the name of the object. Did your knife or your gun have a scary name? Was it painted black? Did you have Punisher skull grips on your pistol? Yeah, a prosecutor might latch onto that and try to paint you as a would-be gunfighter. But if the character of your actions was always above board, then that shouldn't matter. It should be you're okay despite that. Opinions vary on whether you should complicate your life by deliberately doing things that a prosecutor might seize on if you did have to answer for your actions. And in my case, in a lot of cases, I think do what makes you happy as long as you conduct yourself like a reasonable person, and just be aware that, there are certain measured, calculated risks. If you put that, that gunfighter symbology on your pistol, or you're carrying a knife in a sheath that has a skull stenciled on it, don't think these things aren't going to be paraded around in court when you have to answer for your actions. Like, oh, this guy he clearly was looking for it. He was clearly looking to hurt somebody. But they're going to do that to you anyway. You never heard anything about Kyle, the kid in Wisconsin. You never heard anything. Rittenhouse. You never heard anything about, like, his gun didn't have a come and take it plate on it. He didn't have, Punisher skull imagery. There was nothing about the nature of the weapon. It was all about his actions. And it was his actions that inevitably, or I should say, eventually secured his freedom, because amazingly, he did everything right. He received really good coaching before he took the stand. He answered all the questions exactly correctly. And all of that made a difference. And against a very hostile prosecution, a prosecution that ignored many facts and pretty much defamed that kid in an attempt to secure his conviction. Now, the fundamental mistake he made was putting himself in a situation where he would need to defend himself in the first place. But that doesn't diminish that what he did was self-defense. You could say, well, he'd probably prefer never to have done any of that and not have had his life changed so radically. But, until you can climb into your DeLorean and go back and fix that, you're stuck with what is.
Right. Well, Phil, we've gone an hour. I want to do one last little chapter of the book, if we can do that briefly, and then we'll sort of wrap it up. The first person I heard that really criticized this used to be Mark McYoung. Mark used to criticize this a lot, but the old saying, better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. What's some thoughts on that?
That comes back to just what we've been talking about. The legal aspects of self-defense are in many cases worse than the physical aspects of self-defense. If you have to hurt someone in self-defense, and especially if you have to kill them, you will go to court. You will have to answer for your actions. If you use a weapon other than a firearm, you are more likely to face trial for your actions simply because of societal perception of using a knife for self-defense. I love knives. I'm all about them, but I'm very aware that if I ever have to use a knife in self-defense, I'm going to end up in court defending myself. There's a YouTube documentary that I've referenced several times that I think is called The Edge of Defense. And it's about a kid named Jared Ha who used a karambit to cut a guy off him when that dude was on top of him and essentially bashing his head in. Jared did everything right. He did everything absolutely correctly, gave his attacker every opportunity to disengage, used only the amount of force necessary to neutralize the attack. And I believe his attacker lived. But the fact is, he went to trial and was given many times the chance to take a plea deal that would have left him with a conviction and ruined his life. And instead, he risked it all and risked going to prison for even longer and was acquitted by the skin of his teeth. It's good that he was acquitted because what he did was legitimate self-defense. But it is a measure of our society what he went through. And the ordeal that he was put through by our legal system is by no means unique. If you use potentially lethal force, our legal system will wring you out. It may bankrupt you. It will put your family through hell. And there are a lot of people who've been through that process who I'm willing to bet are having trouble with the calculus of I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6, because I'm sure there are people who are like, I kind of wish I had died rather than put my family through this. So all you can do is keep legalities in mind and not deliberately do anything that will break the law. A friend of mine was carrying a blade that I know to be illegal where he is. And he's like, well, I would hope they'd take into account that I was defending myself. And I said, no, they won't. You need to switch that out for something that's not explicitly illegal, because they don't care about you. And if I can impress your viewers with anything when it comes to our legal system, is that our legal system doesn't care if you die. They don't give a damn if you were defending yourself. You need to do everything exactly legally and above board. And even then you're still at risk. Because that's how our society views self-defense these days. It's horrible, and we need to fight back against it, but that's the reality.
No, some good advice. And that's, you said it earlier, if we can avoid and stay out of it completely, that's number one. Just, we don't get hurt. We don't deal with the legal system. And that's why that is so important. And that's something that really needs to be stressed to younger guys, because it is younger guys that get into more trouble because of ego and pride and do stupid stuff.
That couple that was, I believe they were in India, and they were assaulted by a gang of men, and the man was forced to watch at knife point while his either his wife or his girlfriend was sexually assaulted. They made one very critical mistake. They were in an area where this gang sort of menaced them. They came back to the exact same area later and made camp, and that's when they were assaulted. And you can't avoid danger in all cases. There's that stupid saying, just don't go to bad places where bad people are. Well, danger can always find you. Many people who've been home invaded have learned that lesson. But if you see something that raises a red flag, just go. You don't need to be there. Leave. Don't come back.
Yeah. It's funny. Dixon put up, he loves The Punisher. I do too, Dixon. Just one of many Punisher books that I have in my collection. And I'm going to close with The Punisher reminds me back when I was very young, and people know that I read advanced books at an early age. So I was reading stuff very young that maybe I shouldn't even have been reading. I learned about snuff movies when probably fourth or fifth grade or something, which, a fourth or fifth grader shouldn't really know about snuff movies. But I learned from them from the Executioner books, Mac Bolan, because I had an older stepbrother back at the time who was reading those. And so I was reading them. And just so happens that, when Don Pendleton stopped writing Executioner books, they were continued by a variety of authors, including this guy named Phil Elmore, which this is one of the Mac Bolan Executioner books that Phil wrote. And
yeah,
Phil,
I wrote 23 of those.
23. And so besides self-defense, Phil has written tons of magazine articles, different things, and 23 of the Mac Bolan Executioner books. And so fun reads. I still read these every once in a while, just read one quickly because they're light and easy and fun. And Phil's contribution to the series, great contribution.
Thank you.
Phil, before we go, thank you much for being on here. I think we shared a lot of valuable stuff for people. How can people get a hold of you or learn more about you or buy an Executioner book or any of your other books?
Well, unfortunately, you can only buy the Executioner books used now because the Pendleton's widow, Linda Pendleton, passed away, and the future of that estate is kind of in limbo, and the Kindle books that they had on Amazon aren't there anymore. So there's lots of books on the used market, so you can find them used. But as far as my other stuff, you can find me on Amazon. I have forthcoming a PDF ebook series at oldmanwithaknife.com, where you can see some of the titles that I'm currently working on creating. Those will be available directly through me because they're books that are not exactly platform friendly, where I can just kind of say what I want and sell the PDF files directly. But as always, Amazon. There's even modernneeds.net, I think it is, sells this book, which is a survival book that I rewrote for them. That used to be, it was originally written by a fellow named Damian Campbell, who's written scores of survival books. And I updated this book for a more modern audience. It's called The First 72 Hours. And that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun sort of following. And I've had the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of a number of great authors. I was a big fan of Jerry and Sharon Ahern, and I got to write a book with the Ahern estate. Jerry was still alive when we first started planning it, and Sharon is still with us, of course. And the book I wrote is called America Undead, and it's essentially historical vampire patriotic fiction. I know it sounds weird. So I've had a very diverse writing career. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of people in interviewing. When I was working with internet marketers and interviewing people in self-defense and survival, I got to meet so many people who up to that point I only knew from Paladin Press books. It's been, I am very grateful for the nature of my career, and I'm still at it. So I look forward to spending my remaining years as an article troll sitting in this office creating more books.
Do you still have the Mayhem website?
Enginesofmayhem.com forwards to my Etsy store, where I sell Kydex sheaths for various knives, fruit knives, and a few other things. I still do that. I don't, it's getting to the point where I need to be spending more time at my desk and less time in the shop, but I really enjoy working with my hands. And it's kind of nice to know that there are people out there carrying something that I made. They're carrying a knife in a sheath that I made. That really, it's nice. It's really, you get an email from somebody, yeah, I bought this and it's really great and I like it and it's high quality, and yeah, just like that.
That one right here. Yep, that's one of the sheaths you made for one of the little paring knives.
Yeah. So the Victorinox, the knife that started, the knife that Ed's Manifesto and Matt Studebaker helped make popular, Victorinox has changed that model, and the new model, they keep changing the model numbers, and I can't buy them in bulk as somebody without a brick and mortar store anymore. So I had to start offering a different fruit knife on my Etsy store, but there is still a thriving market for paring knives and Pioneer Woman paring knives. I know that people from Pioneer Woman weren't thrilled when they found out that a budding generation of would-be knife fighters was carrying their kitchen knife because Ed helped make it popular. They redesigned the knife. It's not as good now as the first generation knife, and people are still buying it, and I'm still making sheaths for it because it's still a very capable knife. So getting involved in all that I really enjoy fads and trends in the knife and self-defense industry. So anytime some new fad comes along and people are suddenly excited about it, that fascinates me. I love exploring that. So, this is part of a larger trend, the sort of hobo tactical trend. Whereas once we talked about and bragged about how expensive our carry knives were, and people were carrying around knives that were almost as expensive as guns, now it's, oh, I bought this for $2 and a ham sandwich in a bodega, and I have a sheath melted from a Coke bottle. Everyone's trying to see how cheap they can go as opposed to how expensive they could go. Those trends fascinate me. It's not good or bad. It's just really interesting.
Well, thank you much. And I wanted people to know that you did some of that other stuff and where they could find you. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And want to thank everybody that joined live and commented. Appreciate all of you. Thanks to everyone who watches this on a replay. You can reach out to Phil or I if you have questions about anything we said on today's show. Those that listen on the podcast, the same. Reach out to Phil or I. We appreciate all of you and all the different ways you watch or listen to these. Visit enjoylifesafely.com. Make sure you're on that list. Get those free resources to help you stay safe, enjoy life, and be exceptional. Thank you again, Phil. And everybody, go out and make it a fantastic Friday.